Hello and welcome to the Creative Cake System. I'm Ceri Griffiths and I've worked in association with Katy Designs to develop this exciting new range of moulds to enable me to give you the look of royal icing, those sweeping elegant lines that used to only be achieved with a piping bag. Now, a few things we need to talk about before we start. Yes, the world knows me as someone who pipes, someone who does royal icing. However, I'm very much aware there are definitely two camps of cake artists out there. There are those who pipe and there are those who use moulds, cutters. They sometimes cross over, but I think between the both of them, they will agree with me that the sweeping elegance of royal icing is something that sets a cake aside from many others. A few things we need to look at within this is, what paste am I using? Now, the sugar paste, or fondant to my American friends, is actually something we're going to be using in there because we want a product that's edible. This, after all, is going to be cut with a slice of cake and eaten at a party or a celebration. Our normal fondant or sugar paste you might find is too soft for these molds. So we've done some extensive testing and we have a bit of a guideline for you. Now, if you are using a sugar paste or a fondant that for you is really sticky or really soft, or you're in a very humid climate, I would say add probably about 1 to 1.5 teaspoons, and we've been using Wilton Tylose powder. Some of you may know it as Gumtex. If you've got a product that's actually firmer to start with, you may only need a teaspoon of that Wilton Tylose powder. However, rule of thumb, if it's too soft, a little bit more Tylose powder will bring it back to the firmness you need. Once you've thoroughly kneaded it in, set the paste to one side for about an hour, just to let the paste cool down a bit, because obviously the heat of your hands will have affected it, and also to let those gums within the paste mature. You'll then have no problems with it at all, I assure you. A couple of things we need to bear in mind as well. To give the illusion of a royal iced or a piped cake, you need to think about the positioning of the molded pieces on the cake. So I have a system I call pinch or push. Now, it will become apparent in some of the molds, and in this video I will go through every one of the molds that we're using so far, and I will tell you which ones will and which ones will not need this process. But if I've got a cake, hence cake number one. If I have a cake, if I'm trying to take a flat molded piece of paste, it's never going to sit into a right angle. So you'll see me mention pinching. I will go and I will pinch the back of the molded piece before I take it out of the mold. It will create a 90-degree angle and it will sit into this joint. Likewise, if I've got the same molded piece and it needs to go at the top edge of the cake, you'll see me reach for something like a lollipop stick, could be a paintbrush handle, and while the paste is still in the mold, I'll rest this on the back, press it into it. It's like scoring card if you're a crafter. It'll then enable the paste to bend, so I can then bring the cake in, wrap it around the top surface without damaging all that fine detail that Katy Sue has taken the pains to put in there for me to create the realism of the look. Now let's talk about the cake itself. Trend lately has been, we love those beautiful sharp edges. I love them myself. But if you spend all the time doing these sharp edges and you're intending to put the illusion of these molded borders on, it will go against you. It is easier if your cake edge is slightly chamfered. When you've finished, if you just run your hand around it, it will curve it off ever so slightly, and therefore there will be less of a problem when you're actually attaching your molded pieces. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to go through every single mold that we do. I'm going to show you how to demold it, or how I have personally found it easiest to demold. I will talk about it, show it to you here as it comes out of the mold. We'll then look at an example of it on a cake as well. So let's get on with it and have a look at how this system works. Okay, so the first mold we're going to look at, these are the S-scroll molds. I've given them to you in a mirrored effect because there are left-handed people out there who would like left-handed designs. There are right-handed people who like right-handed designs. There are also opportunities to create corner pieces, some really elegant borders, and by that you can mirror them. So if you're a right-handed person, you would use the left-hand side of the mold. If you're a left-handed person, you use the right-hand side of the mold. As you play, it will become more and more apparent, and you will forget left and right-handed. You will just grasp this mold and go, wow, that's the side I want, that completes my design. We've already talked about our paste. You will probably find when you roll out a piece of paste, you will have rolled out twice as much as you need, but you'll not be sure of it. Don't worry, I have a method for taking it off. Now, when it comes to what do I put in my mould, we here at Katy Sue will actually use cornstarch or corn flour in our moulds. I do know some of you will reach for Trex or Crisco, white vegetable fat as a preference. We haven't tried it with those. Please, whatever works best for you. So I'm going to take some cornstarch or corn flour, just put a bit on the table, and I'm going to get a soft dusting brush. I've chosen quite a large one, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to work the dust into the mould. Make sure it's all the way down inside. Now, a couple of reasons we're doing this. Number one, the cornstarch will take out any moisture that is in that mould. So if your mould has been sat around and maybe a bit of condensation has come into it, this will remove it. Also, it'll put a really fine coating on your mould to help release. Now, to be honest with you, the silicone that's used in this is high-grade, food quality silicone, which releases all food products. But there's always that day when it's a hot, sticky day or it's been raining outside and you're going, how do I do it? We always reach for the cornstarch brush. Now, we know this is a long piece, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to roll it long for a start. I'm going to put some cornstarch on my fingers and I'm going to start at the head of this and I'm pushing it in. Now, what I'm doing is I'm squeezing it and pushing it down because I want it to go down into the depth of that mould. I find if I start at the head of this, I can then work this paste along the mould so that it comes all the way to the end. When it's down here, use the pad of your thumb and just wipe it off. Obviously, any spare paste, put it under a cover. I'm using a small drinking glass here, just so it doesn't dry out as I'm working with the rest of the paste. Spend a little bit of time tidying this up. Now, there is quite a practice out there as well of people will take a knife or a palette knife and scoop along the top. You can do that. I know some decorators who do that with all moulds. I do find though that I don't want to damage my mould. It's easier for me to just thumb swipe. Now, I've got my paste firmly in there. Next step is you need to book fold it or open it out. So I rest my thumb gently and I'll pull the mould away from the side of the paste. Do that on both sides. Because we're trying to get a realism of the piped border, there are some undercuts with these designs to give the roundness of line work. So once I've done that, released it, I personally find releasing it from the tail to the head works best. So I'll open it out, there it goes, and then work my way back, all the way back to the head of the piece, and it comes out. The first thing I do is I then go in and I gently shape it with my fingers, just so that I've got that smooth sweep to it. This is what I would do if I'm creating a border. I would probably create 5 or 6 of these before I start attaching them to the cake. If I immediately attach this to the cake, what I could do is all these fine serrated marks on it, I could damage them. But in the few minutes it would take me to do, say, 5 of these, this would be firm enough for me to actually pick up and add on to a cake. Now, in some of the designs you'll see, I've used them on the top, I've used them on the bottom. This normally, if it was on the top edge of a cake, would just sit on the edge and this top edge would curl over the edge of my cake. If it was on the bottom edge of a cake, it would normally be supported by a barrel, which you'll see later on when we show you how to do the barrels. So this is our S-scroll. It comes in 2 sizes currently, and we will show you some examples of that right now. So here we have the S-scroll and it's on a cake. So here I've put the 2 side by side. That's the larger, that's the smaller. This is a double S-scroll. I've used the same S-scroll here, although I've put it over a barrel, and by doing this, it's called an interlocking S. There's one thing I want to point out here. This is as it comes out of its mould, and as you can see, what we've done is we've experimented. We went ahead and used a paste extruder, and we've extruded a top line and then stuck it down the top of it. If you're someone who actually does pipe, you could always go in for royal icing, get a number 2 piping tip and pipe a line of royal icing on top. But to be honest with you, the scroll is beautiful on its own. We were just playing around, trying to see how far we could push the look of this cake. So now we come on to the C mould. This is a C scroll. As you can see, once again, we've done mirrored, and we've done that with all of our molds to give you the maximum use you can get out of it. With a C-scroll, you can do it upside down, inverted. They could be interlinked. In the future, you will see more and more designs coming from me. There'll be inspirational boards. I will support you via Katy Sue Designs website and my own to actually show you how to utilize these molds. But I fully recommend do a little look on the internet at Royal Iced Cakes and see what you can do with the molds you already have in front of you. So here we have the C-scrolls. I'm going to do the same process as before for exactly the same reason. I'm just going to put one of these in here. Now, if you do find there's too much in there, you can always tap it out. But I do find with the brush, you tend to not keep residue in here. Again, I know the shape, so let's roll out a teardrop shape. I know I'm going to have spare paste. I don't think I have ever rolled out exactly the right amount. So put a bit of my finger. I'm going to start at the head of this mold. Again, I'm squeezing it as I work along. The squeezing action will give me a peak. And then when I push down, that peak goes into the mold, which means it'll go all the way to the bottom of the mold and capture all of that lovely detail work. When I get to the end, I just thumb swipe it. Then I go back in and I do a bit of housekeeping here, just to make sure that none of the paste has gone over the side of the mold. If you do not do a clean edge along here, you'll end up with this little fringing bit. Nobody wants that on their border. It's harder to get rid of when it's on the cake. It's easier to get rid of here. So I've given that a really good firm press. Now remember that book process? We're opening the book. Put your thumb gently on the paste and open it up like a book, just to make sure we've released everything so that as you're pulling it out or dropping it out of the mold, it's not going to distort on you. Again, as I said before, my personal preference is to release from the tail to the head. So I will turn it upside down, pull it back, and as you can see, voila, one C-scroll. Now, again, like before, if you make several of them, then you can pick these up and put them straight on. But as you can see, it does hold its shape. It's quite an easy piece to use. This would normally sit behind an S scroll, although it is a scroll on its own. It could sit on a shell, it could sit on a barrel. So lots of uses for this one. So let's have a look and see how this looks on a cake. So here you go. Now this is where the C scroll has sat on here. It's sat at the back of the S. That's a very traditional use of it, but as I said, the C-scroll in itself is a beautiful sweeping shape. You could have tucked another smaller C-scroll into there just to enhance the design further. It's one of those elements that's timeless. You can use it in any way, shape or form. Now we're going to start looking at the barrel. Now the barrel is one of those foundation pieces. A barrel and a shell would normally be a support system for another item of piping, although it's a very elegant piece and you will see me use it in a standalone manner on some of my cakes. So let's look at this, and this is one of the pieces that we definitely need to look at pinch or push. So I've got my two barrels here, and I'm just going to dust them with the cornstarch as I said before. I'm going to take my piece, now we know it's torpedo shape, so I'm going to give it a bit of an end to it. Again, put it into the mold, cornstarch on your finger, press it down, and I'm going to work my way along, squeezing the fondant as I go, and at the end I'm just going to wipe it off. Now, if I was to leave like this, you would see I've got all this fringing, so make sure you fold it back in again. Give it a bit of a push down and get all of that detail in. Now, this is one of the examples where this is a flat-backed mold. So I'm going to prise that open slightly and pop out the barrel. As you can see, it's a beautiful detailed piece of work. Now, if I was to attach this to a cake, this would not fit into a right angle. The only time I could use it would be if I was sticking it directly onto the side of the cake, not going over the top edge. And there are times when I will be doing that because there are some of the more ornate borders that you would want that as a support or even a design element. So that would be it with the flat back on it. So let's take that one more time and show you what I mean by the push method. So again, roll it into the shape that I need, go back in. I know it's the right side because I've just taken it out of this mold, so I can just work it in there. press it in quite firmly. As I said, this is very good quality silicone. It will release. The only thing that should keep it in here and make it not release is if you've got moisture or if your fondant or your sugar paste is too sticky. Now, let's say I want this to wrap around the top edge of a cake. I'm now going to take this lollipop stick, or I did say it could be a cake dowel, it could be a paintbrush handle. I'm going to lay it down the middle and I'm going to give it a bit of a push. As you can see, it's given me a groove down the middle. It's like scoring card if you're a crafter. Now when I pop this out, if I pick it up and glue that, as you can see by the overhead camera here, it will be easy for me to give that a little bit of a pinch, and that will give me the right angle that would sit quite flush on a cake. So one more time, we now need to look at the pinch method, and I need a little bit more paste for this one. So once again, once you're doing these cakes on a regular basis using the creative system, you will find that you will instinctively start picking up balls of paste that are almost exactly the right size. If you're going to be doing a large cake and you're thinking, I can't be doing it with all of the guesswork, you could mold a piece, weigh it, and then write that on the packaging so you know that every time you use that mold, you know exactly how much paste goes into it. So here we go. Got it in the mold. I'm going to press it down. Now this time I'm not going to swipe the excess off. What I'm going to do is I've got a bit of cornstarch on my fingers. I'm going to pinch from the sides inwards. Now if I do have too much at this point, I can tear it off the end. I'm going to come in again from this end and I'm just pressing my fingers together. I don't care that that's a perfectly straight line. What I do care about is that the end of the molded pieces are nice and clean. That line down there, when I pop this out of its little mold, now you can see if we look from the overhead camera, we have a right angle. So that right angle would fit perfectly between the side of the cake and the board. And you'll see that a lot. So that shows you just with this one barrel, which is a support system for a lot of other scrolls. This is the pinch version. This is the push version, and you'll find those very handy. Just remember, you need to do them before you take them out of the mold, otherwise you'll distort the molded pieces. So let's have a look at how some of those sit on a cake. So here are the barrels in action. As we're showing here, there would normally be something on top of them, but I just wanted to show them as a foundation and explain what I'd done. Now, when I said the barrel naturally had a flat back, this would be one of the barrels where it sat flush against the side of the cake. When it came to the push method, the one that gave the groove into the back, it would be used so that the barrel could go around the corner of the top edge. The pinch method means that then I have somewhere where this can sit into at the bottom at the 90 degrees. Remember, this particular shape would normally use as a foundation for another scroll. However, I think it's beautiful in itself, and I very often will use a barrel as a design element. So now we come on to the serrated V. Now the inspiration for the serrated V mold comes from a book of historical collections that I have, and I went through it, and I always feel that tomorrow's designs are usually inspired by designs I found in the past. And for me, I took some elements from an old book, put them together, and this has become one of my all-time favorite molds in this collection. I use it for everything. So again, we have the serrated V here. I'm going to come in and I'm going to put some dust in. This is a very, very detailed mold. There's lots of very fine detail line there. So do make sure that you give it a good old dusting. I'm going to take my ball of paste. Again, we know it's roughly a V shape. Give myself a bit more cornstarch there. I always start at the top of this one and I'll press it in firmly just to make sure I'm beginning to get the barrel shape. Then I'll work my way down, pushing the paste as I go all the way down to the front, and then I will swipe my thumb pad across it to take off. I usually have to do that a couple of times with this mold because there's quite an expansive paste, and I want to spend my time to make sure it's really, really clean in here. So I think I'll probably take a little bit more off that. You don't want it bulging at the back when it comes out of the mold. So let's give that a bit of that. Now, before I demold that, let's just talk a bit about pinch and push when it comes to this mould. Turn that around there. Just make sure it's nicely done. Now, if I was going to put this around the top edge of a cake, I could have it fitting flush to the side of the cake. However, if I want this barrel to go over the top edge, I would have to come in and do the push method to give myself the crease along the top, the score line that would enable me to wrap it round. If, however, I'm doing it from the bottom edge of the cake, what I would do is once I've done my book pull and I've released it from the mould, again, turn it over, it will release, and look at all that beautiful detail in there. If I was going to do this on the bottom edge of a cake, because we've designed this to be realistic, it wouldn't sit flush with the board. So I would come in with a really small knife and just trim that flat before I sat it onto my cake. Something else we've done with this in the past too, and it was a very delightful thing to do, is don't forget you could take a knife, cut the barrel off totally, and just have that as a design element. On one of the cakes you'll see in the gallery, I've done that, and then I've taken a shell and I've cut the shell in half and replaced the barrel with two shells with a flower in the middle. Infinite opportunities with this one. I absolutely love it. It's very Art Nouveau, very design element, very geometric. So let's have a look and see how I've used that one. So when it comes to the serrated V, again, a couple of things to think about. This is it, and what I did, this was where I would have pushed into the back so I can curl that barrel over the top of the cake. On the bottom here, this is where I trimmed the very bottom edge, probably taking about 2 mil off the bottom, just so it sits flush on the bottom of the cake. Again, one of these elements I really love. I really can't wait to get more time to play with this, because can you imagine doing this in black and then painting the stripes in gold? Very exciting element. So this is the triple shell mould. This is the shell mould that can be used in so many different ways. I want to actually demold each one of these to show you what the differences are. Now, I'm sure there's those of you out there who are saying, why has Ceri done a single shell? Why not do a line of shells? If I do a line of shells in one mould, I'm limited. That means I've just got the line of shells. However, by doing individual shells, I can do a shell followed by a barrel, followed by maybe the serrated V, then followed by a shell, followed by... Do you see what I mean? I also have the option of spacing the shells wider apart and putting a design element within them. A shell isn't just a support system. A shell is a beautiful piece of icing all on its own. We can use it as an upward shell, a downward shell. We can use it as a shell on its own. They could be grouped together. So I'm going to demold all three because I've actually made sure the designs are slightly different to give you a flexibility in the characteristic of the shape. So once again, go in there. Make sure we've got some cornstarch in there, although you will have no problem with any of these molds if your paste is correct. So let's start with the middle one. Again, roll it. We know it's a teardrop shape. So make it a teardrop shape to start. I'll go in. I usually work from the head to the tail on this one. Press down, work your way up. As you can see, I'm doing that squeezing action. To me, it's just instinctual to do it. After you've used this system for a while, you will just do it automatically without even thinking of it. Around here, we want to make sure we can clearly see the edge of the mold. Again, there's that thumb swipe one more time. Come in and make sure this is all nice and cleanly pushed together. Now, I've got it in the mold, and I'm going to do that opening of the book thing I did before, just to make sure it's finally done. Pop it out. As you can see, a beautifully elegant mould, and in a couple of seconds we'll be looking at some of these on a cake and you'll see the beauty of them. This can be done from the bottom of the cake going upwards, the top of the cake coming down. You could do them as a fan effect with a flower or something in the middle, or maybe a piece of jewellery in the middle if you're doing really a large creation. Great mould. I love the detail that Katy Sue was able to capture in that. So now we've got the middle size one. Again, ball of paste, make it to a teardrop. You might as well save yourself the effort. Make it roughly the right shape to start with. Exactly the same process. I'm squeezing that paste together. I'm pushing it down. I'm using my thumb pad to take off the excess. then work your way through. Now, one thing that Katy Sue Designs has done that's incredibly clever here is you'll note we have a stepped mould. That means you're not trying to take a smaller piece out of this depth and it would hazard to you. You would not be able to get it out and release it nicely, but by making a stepped mould, they've done a really good job of making sure these things will just drop out for us. So there you go. Again, I do that opening the book just to make sure all of the undercuts work and pop it out, and there you go. Now, again, we spoke earlier with either of those, I could put C-scrolls onto them. I could use them as a design element on their own. Really, really nicely done. I mean, I haven't experimented yet, but I think that would catch them airbrushing beautifully, or you could luster dust them. Just think how far you can take this system. So I'm going to come on, I'm going to do the very last one. A bit of crumb in there. Now, this is the one that's just the generic shell. This one you could easily use around the edge of a cookie, around the edge of a cupcake, around the top edge of a cake in itself. So same process. Now you may think, oh, this is a bit time consuming, but I can assure you, when you get going, you will put these out so quickly. The skill in this is actually the design element. You can put paste into a mould, you can pop the paste out of the mould. What you do after that is what makes you an artist. So don't forget, it's not just a plain old shell, it's an element that you can use in this system to create something new. There you go, so a beautiful shell. Now this is one of the things that if I was trying to attach that to the top edge of a cake, I would have to do the push method. If I was trying to attach it around the bottom of the cake where it joined the board, this would be the pinch method. And remember, you would do that in the mould before you demold it. So let's have a look at how some of those look on a cake. So now we're looking at the shells. So here we've got the biggest shell. Then we've got the smaller ones and the smaller still. As you can see, just by placing them there with no other design element on them, they're attractive in themselves. Up here, what I've done is I've made a shell border, and again, I did the push technique to give it that scored line so that they'd wrap around the top. A simple border for a simple cake means that maybe the element in the middle, the inscription, the plaque, the arrangement of flowers, is something that is the focus of the cake. So I love this border. I found lots and lots of different uses for it. I'm sure you will too.